Welcome to Magical Books for Kids, a podcast sponsored by Magic Everywhere, Inc., a company based in Florida. Hosted by Michael John Sullivan, this is your place to hear the very best children's stories and an opportunity to get to know your favorite authors. Now, here is Michael John Sullivan.
Welcome to Magical Books for Kids. I'm Michael John Sullivan, and thank you for joining us for another edition. You can hear us on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, magiceverywhereinc.com, and soon our YouTube channel, Magic Everywhere Inc. We're happy to be joined by Brooke Young. Her passion for multi-generational interactions was born while visiting nursing homes with her golden retriever, Molly, and her grandpa. A passionate advocate for meaningful communication between generations and volunteerism, she takes to the Miss Ohio stage in 2021. She has written an incredible, true, engaging story which takes children on a journey with a lovable therapy dog, Murray. He teaches them about volunteering and serving others and demonstrates the purpose and impact of multi generational relationships. By visiting his friends at the nursing home, Murray's own heart fills with compassion and love while impacting those around him. Brooke Young, thank you so much for joining us for this very important show. Murray's Miraculous Mission is the name of the book, and it's been written, of course, by you, Brooke Young, illustrated by Chad Thompson. So thank you so much for joining us.
I am so excited now. I made you say a little bit of a mouthful with those multi-generational relationships there. Congratulations for getting through that. I know it was a lot.
Yes, it was tough with my New York accent too. It's sort of like, it's like a grind. I grind it
Oh, I know.
through those, you know?
Well, I get caught up in my words sometimes, and I speak oftenly about multi-generational relationships. And one of the things that I find is that so few people actually know the definition of the word. And so to put that into a book was a great way to explain it without having to tell people, now this is what it is. It's great to just show it.
Now, you are a children's author, and it's a beautiful book. I've had a chance to read it, and I encourage everybody out there to buy this because it's an important book. Because many of us are going through that whether with our parents, our grandparents, our aunts, or uncles. I have a particular relative that is in a nursing home as well, and I do get a chance to visit her every so often. And you mentioned something to me before this, and you said when you go into a place like that, it's you lose your freedom. So as a young girl, you were 8 years old when you first started this. What was your thought behind this particular situation? What you wanted to do?
Well, it's such an interesting story how Molly, she was my golden retriever, and I got started because that's not a typical activity for a young girl to want to be doing in her free time. We actually saw an ad in the newspaper that just showed there was an increased need for these type of dogs in our area. I'm from rural Ohio. They didn't really have a lot of the type of therapy animals that they needed. And well, I had this wonderful, loving, vivacious, terrific dog. And I said, hey, could we try this? And it really came about like that. We began training. We spent several months training. And we'd go into our backyard. We live on a rural retired farm in Ohio. And we would just do all the tricks and do all the commands. She aced the test. And we spent about 4 years visiting every single week. My grandpa, of course, being that I couldn't drive at 8, took me to all of the training and took me conversely every week as well. And not only did it strengthen my bond with Molly, not only did it strengthen my bond with him, but it also strengthened my sense of community and my sense of these people are older than me, but we have meaningful ways to interact with each other. We have things to teach one another. We can enrich each other's lives by being a part of them. And they absolutely adored seeing Molly. She was a great friend to them, and they always looked forward to her coming. But we developed really meaningful bonds as well, even beyond Molly. And some of our conversations really did change my life.
So at the young age of 8, with your grandpa, of course, driving you, you wouldn't be going on your little scooter over to little places and everything, especially in the rural Ohio. You certainly need a car to get around there as well. And with your beautiful dog, Molly, um, did it was that your first dog that you had? Because it took me about 60, no, not 60, it took me about 50 years to have our first dog. His name was Little Brother. He was this lovable little puppy, And to me, it taught me a lot about how dogs make an impact with people. And you took it to another level where not only did it make an impact with you, it made an impact probably with hundreds and hundreds of people that needed to see or to see a dog. I mean, dogs are like, I believe, the angels on earth.
They are, and you hit the nail on the head. So there's been a tremendous amount of research just to talk about therapy dogs or even just a simple pet and the emotional response they elicit. They help physically. Many of our aging population struggles with high blood pressure, depression, a lot of mental health issues just from being confined in those little white rooms, which I simply couldn't imagine. And to be able to combat that person by person, decrease the loneliness, decrease the anxiety, decrease the depression was a great honor. Molly was my first large dog. I did have a 4-pound dog before her that recently passed away at almost 20 years old. And Murray is actually a real dog. He is a Canadian Saint Berdoodle. And he really tests me because we're not very much different in weight.
So Murray is around right now.
He is a real dog. He is 3 years old. He loves sleeping. He loves ball and he loves wearing a medal. Now, I had just a toy medal, and one day he went up to this medal and just started nuzzling his head. And I was like, what do you want? Well, turns out he likes to walk around in a medal and feel very proud of himself. So he has a very inflated sense of ego, especially because he has his own book.
It's amazing, right? They have their own personalities, and as they get more and more comfortable with you, they become a little bit more confident in showing you their personalities. So this is a wonderful idea. Now, as a child, did you read a lot of children's books?
I did. I have always been a reader, an avid one. I used to go to the library with my little bag and just get as many books as I could fill up. In regards to one of my favorite books, I've always been an advocate for Charlotte's Web. I really have no reason as to why, but I think the story is profound and very meaningful.
So if that particular book struck you, was as you got older, did you latch on to other authors or other particular stories or series? I hear all the time, especially the ladies, they talk about Nancy Drew and the mysteries and everything like that. Whether there's any particular series, I would assume Harry Potter was big with you, or perhaps I'm not wrong on that one.
Well, you actually didn't hit the nail on the head with that one. I have never read the Harry Potter series, which surprises a lot of people. I probably should get to doing that. And more of an elementary type, I loved Junie B. Jones. I thought she was absolutely hilarious. As I got older, I really got into the sci-fi, the Percy Jackson, and now I'm 20 and I'm really enjoying Marie Forleo. So if you have not had a chance to read her, I highly recommend her, a nonfiction book, but I love hearing inspirational stories.
That's wonderful. Now, did your parents read to you as you were as a child? There was one thing I didn't have particular in my house. I basically latched on to sports books, any kind of sports books I would read. I wasn't too much into fiction writing until years later. I started to write it myself. So, how was that growing up in the house? Was that taught to you, or is that just in your DNA? I mean, you said you read a lot. That means you had a lot, you had a writing DNA in your blood.
I had an interesting background. So I've been homeschooled from the time that I was from first grade onwards by my mom. So we obviously spent a lot of time together. I've always read quite a lot in my free time. I learned to read at a very young age and was always able to write pretty well, write proficiently, and also to read proficiently as well. And as you may have picked up, I certainly love talking. I'd say it's a combination between reading and in my DNA, but you said something so funny. We must be on opposite ends of the spectrum because I started with the reading, but sportscasting is something I've actually done professionally in the state of Ohio. And you started with the sports and then kind of progressed into the reading. So I thought that was funny how that was flipped.
Well, let's talk about your sportcasting really quickly. How did that develop, and what have you done, and what have you covered?
I have covered college basketball here in Ohio. I was the youngest female sideline to ever cover college basketball here in Ohio. So I did that for Fox Sports Ohio pre-pandemic, and it was a lot of fun and just really great experience. A great way to think on your feet. You never do better improv than in a live game. Totally got ran over by a guy that was 7 foot tall and had a great
Yeah.
experience.
Well, I've been hit in the face with a basketball because I was looking down to put something in my little scorecard, and a ball came and smacked me in the face. So it's I've known those
Well, I was
experiences.
always a little bit scared of that. I was like, but it
Yes.
was a great experience and
Yeah. 'Cause
really helped me develop as a person. Now I'd love to do football.
yeah.
That'd be able.
Yeah, in fact, when I used to be like the national college basketball recruiting guy for rivals.com. And when I was doing that, I actually covered LeBron James as a sophomore when he was playing, and that was my first experience of seeing him. And we were actually the first people to put film of LeBron James up on Sports Channel in New York. So yes, so I understand the whole college basketball, the high school basketball scene. So that's pretty amazing. So at the amazing age of 20, you've already been on TV as a sideline reporter. You doing this incredible work as a young girl, impacting hundreds and hundreds of people who need this every day with your dog and your grandpa. So what would you 20 years old, you get the whole world is at your feet right now. What do you want to accomplish in the future?
One of the biggest things that I'm really looking forward to accomplishing right now is in June, I will compete in Miss Ohio. That was on the back of my blurb there, if anyone caught that. And my platform is actually called Fostering Meaningful Interactions Between Generations. I don't think there's enough advocacy for multi generation. And when I say that, I mean different generations, be it 10 and 40, 40 and 80, interacting together, and how that's enriching. Obviously, I want it to be in a safe environment. And I just always throw that out there. But just the enrichment that comes from that. Music programs for seniors, where the children are making the music as a way to learn how to perform and grow confidence. I actually founded a statewide program of about 200 participants called Pandemic Pals. So during the pandemic, there were seniors in 8 residential nursing homes in rural Ohio, writing to young women throughout the state and even beyond our state a little bit, in pairs, corresponding via written mail during the pandemic, and still correspond today. And I'm very proud of that. And I just like to go out there, kind of pound the pavement and tell people about this innovative idea that changed my life. And one of the best ways I found to explain it is, as a child, I learned about things that most children only learn about in history books. And I wasn't a history fan. Those black and white pages did bore me, but I learned about the Vietnam War, the Korean War, the Great Depression in such great and vibrant color from a real person. I learned those life lessons that you oftentimes don't realize until you're much older from the stories and the vivid illustrations of their life that they would paint me. And they were just very hungry for someone to listen to them.
You mentioned.
One of the biggest things I learned was validation. Every human wants to be heard and validated. I think that really changed the course of my life.
Yeah, and that's a key word, validation, as well as being a volunteer, is because you are validating somebody else's feelings and everything, especially when you visit somebody in person. You mentioned talking to people during that particular generation. Um, in my next novel that I've written, I went onto YouTube and I looked up the situations that happened to these particular people, the greatest generation, they call it, in World War II, what they endured, uh, how they endured it, what kept them going during these parts. And so, what you're doing is you're on the other end there, you're giving them a feeling of importance and that and it's sometimes in this country we sort of like discard the elderly, and that's sad. We don't, but somebody your age is teaching others that this is one of the most important things. So let's talk about this incredible book, Murray's Miraculous Mission. The illustrations were done by Chad Thompson, and we're talking to Brooke Young about her fabulous book. How did this, first of all, what was the process for you? I've read it, I've looked in the back, and to me, the back is really interesting because you have a lot of people that actually look like they sponsored this particular book and this particular message. So, why don't you talk about that, how that came about?
They did. So I'll go into kind of themes because, like you said, I want to give homage to the sponsors, of course. So the process in terms of writing really looked like me sitting down at a Word document and writing my memories, writing what I remembered, and my wonderful family and my wonderful best friends would read it and help me edit it. Everything in the story is true. Everything in the book is something that I remember from my childhood. And obviously, bringing those back from 10 years later took a little bit of time and contemplation, but it took me about 9 months to write, and I'm just very proud that everything in the book is true because it makes it so much more sincere when I tell kids, hey, that was me. This tall lady here in front of you, that was me as a little kid. In regard to the sponsors, yes, I have the most wonderful community here in Ohio as a college student. So I will be graduating in just 3 weeks with my undergraduate degree a little bit early in business administration, broadcasting, and marketing. I'm 2 years ahead of the game, but
Wow.
I obviously have student loans, I have tuition, and I didn't necessarily have the money to pay for high quality illustrations, which is something that I needed to have. I wanted to show kids in a very vibrant, beautiful, colorful, and diverse, which is
Right.
something that I'm passionate about and I'd love to touch on later, way. I didn't want them to just be stick figures, which is what I could draw. And really researching the price of the book, I felt very hopeless, even though I was compelled to tell the story. I started speaking about how I wish to write it in the future, and people came to the rescue and actually helped me fund my book, which I'm grateful for.
That's great. And you approach these particular people about the idea. Did you have to show them an outline or what they would be sponsoring, that type of
Yes, and because I am a Miss Ohio contestant, I'm Miss Heart of Ohio. I say it's because I have a big heart, but I let people be the judge of that one. It was a great way to just help the program, help the Miss Ohio program, and a great way to sponsor my platform as well. So all the pieces really fell perfectly over the pandemic.
Right. So, is there an Murray's Miraculous Mission, written by Brooke Young, illustrated by Chad Thompson? Certainly, the sponsors are many in the back, which is very encouraging to see that these particular corporations and businesses decided to get involved and help present you this message. Is there a particular excerpt you would like to read for us so the reader can have a feel for what this book is about and how it goes? And I think you have a beautiful dedication in loving memory and eternal gratitude to my grandpa, Larry Volz, who volunteered his time to certify Molly and myself, and the many hours we spent visiting area nursing homes. Without his influence, my passion for spending time with different generations would never have sparked, nor would this book exist. So it's a beautiful dedication to your grandfather. So I would think that your relationship with him grew abound while you were doing this too.
I wish he was here to see the book. It was a wonderful time in our lives, and I really wrote this book partially as a dedication and a memory to him. He passed away about 3 years ago from cancer. And I
Mm.
really wanted to share our stories, and I wanted them to impact other people beyond the two of us because they were so important.
Right. So this sort of like inspired you to write this book, your grandfather and what he did for you and your dog.
It did.
Okay. So is there a particular excerpt you'd like to read so we could give the reader a feel for what this book is about? Again, Murray's Miraculous Mission, written by Brooke Young, illustrated by Chad Thompson. The floor is
Yes.
yours, Brooke.
I will read this one. This one is one that I remember pretty vivid and from my real life. With Brooke leading, Murray pranced into the first room and made a beeline toward Ma and Pa. He's adorable, they cried in unison. Smiles lit their faces. He looked around, overjoyed to be there. Then Murray noticed Pa's comfy chair. What are you doing, Murray? Brooke giggled while he wiggled and scratched his back on Pa's chair. Now, that's something I remember. My dog, Molly, used to go in and kind of wiggle herself against his
Mm.
chair. And Paul was a real person. He was a war veteran, and I learned a lot of history from him. And that was just a great bonding moment for them because for some reason, my dog loved to scratch herself and her back on this chair. And I wanted to include that in the book.
Oh,
But yes, the book is basically just going through and developing these relationships. So in the next page, you'll see that he was shaking hands with somebody. He gets up in bed with someone during the story. He even takes a bite of a sandwich, which is a true story. He used to eat people, Molly used to eat people's sandwiches. And so everything in here does come from a true place. Yeah, but that's a little bit of an excerpt, kind of a fun, joyful writing style.
well, it's a wonderful book. Now, what are your plans as far as writing children's books? Is there something that you have in mind for the future? Uh, you're just 20 years old, you're graduating from college. So, what's your next steps? And I'm sure you probably get this question so much from relatives and things like that. Well, Brooke, what are you going to do now that you've graduated college? What are you going to do for the rest of your life? The great thing is you don't have to worry about that, in my opinion, because you can do many things for the rest of your life. But have you been getting that question a lot as graduation approaches?
I certainly do get that question a lot. I'm very fortunate to have been an entrepreneur from the age of 15. I've been a professional vocalist since I was about 15 as well. So I'm grateful to have skills to fall back on as I look toward the future, I would love to write another children's book. The response has been truly tremendous. And now I know so much more of what's out there and the lack of education regarding multi-generation, which inspires me to write even more. In terms of a real person job, I have no clue yet, but gratefully, I don't feel too much pressure. I believe it will come to me when it does.
Okay. And what college are you currently attending?
Ashland University.
Okay. And that's nearby where you reside?
10 minutes from, gratefully. My wonderful parents allow me to live with them, which is a lot of why I can do the things I can do. I think if I was in a dorm room, I never would have got this book.
Right. Somehow, I think we're going to hear from you in a really big time way, not only from this book, but your advocacy for seniors and the elderly, because it's rare. We don't see it too often. Certainly I don't see it as somebody doing this podcast. We don't see too many people writing a book like this, which is to make an impact on everybody else and to, as you said, multi-generational communication is necessary, especially today, more so than ever before. While we have social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, I think we are more antisocial than we've ever been before. So I'm glad that you have written this book. It's beautiful. It's called
I would agree about the social media, but I do have to shout out and say Zoom author visits have been a tremendous amount of fun. And I just want to touch really briefly on something that
Sure.
I learned of a few weeks ago. So I live close to Cleveland. I'm from Northeastern Ohio, not too far away from Cleveland. And I actually came into contact with North Olmsted School District, and their children were collecting donations of stuffed animals and all sorts of things for Easter. And they had made all of these Easter cards that they were decorating and giving to the Cleveland, Ohio nursing homes in honor of my book after doing an author visit. So it's making impact like that. And another young girl is actually training her dog to be a therapy dog, a girl about 12 or 13 from Canada. So it's making impact like that really does make the book worthwhile.
Perhaps you will make the same impact that Charles Dickens made many years ago when he wrote A Christmas Carol. And of course, everybody knows that story, but what most people don't realize is that the giving and the charity picked up substantially after Charles Dickens wrote that book. He basically inspired many generations to give around the time of Christmas. So perhaps you will inspire many more thousands of people, hopefully many thousands of young people as well, to recognize and be aware of our particular situation with the nursing homes and how the elderly need to be validated, as you have said. So the book, again, is Murray's Miraculous Mission, written by Brooke Young, illustrated by Chad Thompson. I want to thank you so much for joining us here on Magical Books for Kids. You can hear this podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, magiceverywhereinc.com, as well as soon to be our YouTube channel, which is Magic Everywhere Inc. So Brooke Young, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And please join us for another edition of Magical Books for Kids, sponsored by Magic Everywhere Incorporated. And you can see all our information and all our podcasts at magiceverywhereinc.com. I'm Michael John Sullivan. Thanks so much for coming and listening.
Thank you for listening to Magical Books for Kids, a podcast sponsored by Magic Everywhere INC, a company based in Florida, hosted by Michael John Sullivan. This is your place to hear the very best children's stories and an opportunity to get to know your favorite authors. Join us for another fun storytelling podcast next week.